welcome, and you will get switched to panelists as you come in. The reason we've done that is so that people can unmute themselves and talk. We are also doing that so that y'all can turn on your videos so that we are not just looking at the four of us, but thank you, Vale. Yeah, so it would be great because we do want this very much to be a conversation over anything else. And welcome everybody. There is a script and perhaps I should open it and read it. So for the introduction, we'll just start off and say thank you everybody for coming to this side event. It is about failing forward and to be able to see, especially in social protection in crisis contexts, what we are able to do with that concept. If you need to rename yourself, you can. You do have that option in Zoom, but also if you look at the chat box and you open it up, you have the option to type to panelists or panelists and attendees. So if you can move that little blue box to panelists and attendees, then actually it doesn't matter because everybody is a panelist, but we would love for you all to introduce yourselves in the chat box. If you can turn on your videos, that would be amazing because we'd love to have a face-to-face conversation. I don't know, Cecile, if we do have the Slido or not, but I don't think we need a Slido at this point in time and not move people around that much. And if everybody, just use the chat box and we can do that, or you're always welcome to unmute yourselves. So my name is Zara. I work for UNICEF MENA, but I'm also a member of the online community for social protection in crisis contexts, which Cecile, who I will hand over to, who is also co-hosting this side event with me right now. So Cecile, over to you to introduce yourselves and tell us about the online community.
Thank you. So hello everyone. I'm Cécile Cherrier. I'm an independent consultant working at the interface between social protection, humanitarian action, and food security, and I'm also an ODI research associate. So 5 years ago, I co-initiated with Céline Felix, Céline, the online community on social protection in crisis context on socialprotection.org. So that was really the early days of the platform. So we're also celebrating our 5th anniversary. So we have now over 240 members in that community. And the aim is really to offer a space to discuss between social protection people, humanitarian people, researchers, basically whoever's interested in the topic. So to exchange knowledge around different countries, different disciplines. This is meant to be eventually the place to go. So we want it to be really a one-stop shop eventually, a gateway to all the different key resources on the topic. And we recently, so we also have nowadays 6 volunteer administrators of the online community. And I see Valentina, I see Claire, so we have Celine, I mean, there are a few of us. And so recently we started this page on the online community in individual members initiative. This side event basically is one of those. So Zara, Celine and I just brainstorm on why can't we learn better from our failure? Why can't we talk more about our failure? Because at the end of the day, that's what we basically learn from the most. Zara, over to you to maybe introduce a bit more the topic.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Cecile. I mean, one of the things, yes, the topic of conversation is failing forward. And for probably about 3-4 weeks now, we have gone around in circles talking about what does it mean to fail forward. We've talked to quite a few of you around this as well to try and figure it out, because what we didn't want happening is that this just turns into a lessons learned conversation. But because, when we talk about failing forward, It means that, you know, we're looking at an innovation or something like that and using that then to fail forward into, you know, doing something innovative, doing something new. What we've seen from the social protection responses to COVID, including in situations of crisis, or I mean, it is a massive crisis, but even in like, you know, crisis contexts, is that it has been a huge, massive innovation. And we wanted to see, you know, are there things that we can be learning from that, you know, in terms of what's next for social protection? And it has been incredibly difficult to be able to do that, because everybody says we need to learn from our failure. You know, everybody loves the topic, everybody wants to talk about it, etc., but nobody actually wants to bring their failure forward. You know, when we have asked for stories, when we have looked for, it's one of the things that Cecile has said that I've loved is, you know, if we do any sort of a desk research around it, etc., you look for the lessons learned section inside a report, and what you find is best practice. You do not find actual lessons learned. You know, are we actually applying the lessons learned? Up until the last minute, last night, Cecile and I were talking about it. And we came back to this whole entire idea and perspective that, you know, unless we find that space, and what does it require for us to be able to do to find that space to actually talk about our failures, to record those failures, to be able to figure out, you know, what did we do differently? What did we take the risk? First of all, how did we take the risk? What enabled us to be able to do that? What enabled us to be able to, you know, try something different? How did we persevere in something? And then if we did fail, how did we learn from that? And how do we share that learning? So we really want to sort of look at the topic today. And again, we very, very much want to keep it open. We don't want our voices coming out in this, but, you know, we would love to hear stories from people around, you know, if you were looking at failure or trying to do something differently, how were you able to take risks? How were you able to adapt, maybe be able to persevere? And how do we create the space to be able to learn constantly, quickly, and jointly? And, you know, the online community is one space for that. It's not the only space. We will have other speakers, etc., or contributors coming in, hopefully, to be able to talk about how do we do that? What can we look at? We have Tina as well here. Tina, if you can wave, who we have asked to come in. She's, well, we will introduce her, but she's got some tips, hints, suggestions for us on how we can be learning. And, you know, we do need failure. It's almost, we have an imperative to do things differently right now. The immensity of the COVID crisis, the socioeconomic impacts, these are going to be with us for a very long time, you know? So we have seen some amazing innovation coming out from the side of governments and other actors, partners, etc., around this. But, you know, instead of just taking any of our failures or lessons learned under a carpet, how can we be bringing those up? How can we be talking about them? And with that, Cecile, over to you to frame us a bit better, and then hopefully we can open it up to all of you.
So we'll see if that frames us a bit better, but I just want to offer an analogy. So if we take this desk lamp, okay, so it's quite handy if you work on a desk. It provides light, and if you're close to a power socket, it works well. If you're on a flat desk, it's perfect, okay? Now, if you want to go camping, probably that won't be that useful. So you need something else. You need to figure out, okay, if I'm far from the power socket, how does that work? I need something that is light, maybe that is waterproof, shockproof. So that's why when you go camping, maybe you go for this, okay? And it's just an illustration of what we mean by innovation. So this would be formal social protection as we know it in many countries, look, as the way it was first introduced. So this is Baron Beveridge. But we want to go for this. It's all-terrain social protection. So how do you want, it's still the same function, so we still have light, but it looks completely different because we want it to be waterproof, shockproof, etc. And just to flag that, to come up with this innovation, it takes teamwork, it takes a lot of try and error, and it takes field tests, lab tests, and feedback from users. So it's a whole process. It's really design thinking. And it's with this thinking that we wanted to discuss more openly about our failure and truly what can we learn from those, so that we can, okay, we keep failing until we innovate and we succeed in expanding social protection in outreach for outreach populations. So that's just a simple analogy to understand a bit better what we're talking about and where we're coming from. So really what we want to discuss is what is needed, what type of environment is needed for us to be able to take risk and try new things. And again, we're not saying innovation is related to technologies, it's just being able to just do things differently. So what is needed at the individual level, in our organizations, in our communities of practice, what is needed to do things differently and to truly learn from our mistakes. I mean, first acknowledge, accept failure, be able to put it under the sun, and then learn from those. So that's the conversation we'd like to have with you today. And as we mentioned, you're all panelists, so you're all free to unmute yourself, turn on your videos, and join the conversation.
We'd love to say that this is like Chatham House rules or something, but the fact of the matter is it is being recorded. It's 100% being recorded, so we can't actually even, yeah. So, I mean, but I mean, the ideal situation is that people are doing it without agency hats on or whatever it might be. I think there's quite a fear around being able to talk about failures as well, because we have donors in the room also, but you know, everybody is a partner. Everybody's trying to do things correctly. So what can we do about that? And maybe before we go to stories, if people have any sort of reflections or in fact even stories to share, you can sort of ping us in the chat box. You can literally just unmute yourself as well, because we have an eye on the mics, or just signal in some way, shape or form. So it could be that you want to share a story, or it could be that you have some reflections. Yes, Anna from Uganda. Thank you so much. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening to folks around the world. My name is Anna Pantelic, and I'm with UNICEF Uganda. So we've had numerous discussions before on the COVID response and things that we've learned. But I think what's clear to me in terms of the COVID-19 social protection response is that there's been many cases where development partners are really looking to push through social protection a humanitarian response. And from what we've seen in countries with mature social protection systems, there are opportunities to do that. But in cases where the social protection system is still quite nascent, where there's some skepticism around it, in the case of Uganda, where we have an election year, there's been quite a lot of pushback. And one of the things that I've really seen is, unfortunately, at the end of the day, you know, donors have a very strong agenda, and they wish to push through cash transfers. But ultimately, if you're looking to go through system strengthening, if you're looking to tap into existing social protection systems, it has to be aligned with government priorities. And if there's pushback from government, then there's, you know, there have to be alternative modalities. And that's one thing that we've really learned here, is that it's been very difficult to get the responses that we wanted through, because it wasn't a priority for government. So we had to be creative and find different workarounds. But I think it's very difficult for development partners sometimes to understand that at times it's just not the right opportunity. And it's really difficult when we want to address a challenge and we see that people are suffering. But if we, again, want social protection, we really have to listen to government. So on that note, I also wanted to applaud a number of different countries that have taken some incredible innovative approaches when it comes to tapping into targeting mechanisms or using alternative modalities for identifying creatively the potential beneficiaries of any social protection response. But I think, again, we as you know, many of us here are not government. We are not public sector employees. Sometimes we're just not aware of the bureaucracy and the administrative processes that are a requirement for government. So I think that we can be super creative on our own and come up with these wonderful ideas, whether they're tech-based or they're, you know, bringing ministries together, whatever the case may be. But the reality is that perhaps two ministries don't talk to each other, or there's a whole bunch of procedures or procurement processes that we may not be aware of. So if we want to innovate, I think we need to sit down with government partners and to sit down and think through the different options, and we can support and lead, but at the end of the day, if we don't have this awareness, then we're just offering a menu of food options that can never be eaten. So I think that to go back to Cecile's metaphor on the lights and the camping, sometimes we're just not ready for camping. Sometimes we're still using the old school backpacks with the metal frames. Other times we're using ultralight materials. So we just have to be aware of what context we're in, what country we're in, what our partners really want. Some people just don't like camping and they want to stay back home and on the couch. So we all find our versions of that camping. And I think I've taken that metaphor too far. But just to share that I think that's one thing that we really need to be aware of and honest about. And I fully agree, Zara, that we don't talk about failure. It's especially, you know, from a government perspective, if you failed using public money, that's a big problem, right? So there's incentives not to share this information and not to be open, whether you're a development partner or a government specifically. So if there's an impact evaluation shows you haven't been successful, sometimes it goes into the bottom drawer if you're in the public sector. Just, I think it's easier to talk about failures once you're past the hurdle and can discuss how you've gone through it. It's much more challenging to talk about it when you're in the midst of it. But I think, you know, when we have these conversations, it's really great to be open about failures and just recognize that that's part of the learning process. So I applaud the initiative. Over.
Thank you, Anna. And, you know, a couple of different points in there. I think you also come from a social impact / innovation kind of ish background, but saying, you know, that donors had a strong agenda to push through cash, etc. And you talked about quite a bit of learning that maybe individuals had, and you know what we want to get to is the organizational learning around that, a community of practice, it's not just about learning, it's about applying those lessons learned and being able to share them in a way. And Sigrid, you're going to hate me, but I love the comment that you have put inside the chat box, and if we can ask you to please unmute yourself and just be able to share that with us a little bit, if that is possible. You are unmuted. Yay. And
hello, everybody, and thanks for sharing this discussion, this very open discussion. Just I was thinking how to actually there's a lot of barriers to openly discuss about lessons learned, because of course you have to be accountable to donors, and I'm among as part of the donor community. So however, as you already mentioned, there is a way of having networks where actually you belong to a network without, it's not on the basis of your belonging to a specific organization, but rather based on a common objective or idea. And that actually you want to be innovative in, or just you feel that there's something that doesn't exist yet, and where we need to create something together, and where we need exchanges across countries and contexts and organizations. So yeah, just to share that. So there is other networks like this already on other subjects, and I think that was a good idea to actually not to belong to it based on your organization. That was the key factor to make it a success. Over.
Which, but can we ask you to just, which are those networks? Because I think it would be really good to know. Yeah, it would be good to know. And, you know, are they working? How do people access these sorts of networks, etc.?
The first one I can think of is, for example, Reflection. And I can paste the link to them in the chat.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Thank you. Okay, and I see Nupur has picked up as well on the point, Anna, that you were making, and Sigrid also kind of referred to it. Well, she referred to it from the other side, because as partners to government. We are always looking at our donors, but governments have that public accountability, you know, so it makes it that much harder for a government to also be able to innovate, to be able to fail, you know, to be able to try something differently. So again, where is the space around that? And we're hearing some good ideas in terms of having these non-branded spaces, kind of like the online community for social protection in crisis contexts. But I'm just keeping an eye out for other people. Yes, Nupur, please.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm not going to put my camera on.
Yes, cool.
So thanks a lot. And I don't know whether you want me to share something like that, but
yes, please.
Since this is an open forum, I thought I could share my own journey. And actually, what Anna just said, it was like a light bulb moment for me, and that's what I just wrote here. It's very important to look at the government perspective. So I started with a development background, went into humanitarian cash, and now I'm back into social protection. So when I started moving back into social protection from humanitarian cash programming, my vision and the glasses that I was wearing were very, very humanitarian focused, and I had all this baggage of perception and biases against social protection. Now that I am a part of social protection, I have this whole baggage of biases against the humanitarian cash folks. Some of them, I would say, I'm not that radical on the other side, on the social protection side, but I do feel that we're not talking to each other enough. I know you were saying that there is this forum exists, and Sigrid, you just talked about reflections. I honestly feel I've been in this space, the gray space between social protection and humanitarian for I think 5-6 years now, and I don't think, and we all keep saying that we need to talk, but we don't necessarily talk. We are just talking to our own, group of people who understand what we are saying, and that's our comfort zone. We don't tend to come out. Now, today, when I was listening to Anna, it just, as I said earlier, it's like a light bulb moment. It just, that was a ping moment for me to say, oh, well, do we understand the government's perspective well enough? Forget about humanitarian development. Do we really understand what governments are facing? What are the political economy challenges that they have? And what determines what decisions they take and how they take that? So that's a very important point, and definitely that's something which I'm going to focus much more on moving forward. So I just wanted to share that, and I think it's been a journey. It's not been a smooth ride, and I still don't think that I've landed anywhere very clearly. Over.
Thank you so much, Nupur, for that. In every single facet of life, it's not just this work, but it is, how much empathy do we have for the other side? How much do we understand who we are interacting with? So many of I'm totally going to do it. So many of the anti-racist conversations that we are also having these days are about, how much can you actually empathize and be in those steps and those shoes of the other person that you are talking with, interacting with, agency that you are talking to, interacting with. And I think it's, just amazing. Zen, I absolutely see your hand, but Cecile, given that we are talking about government perspective.
Yeah, I just wanted to invite Mautor to jump in. So Mautor is the chair of the steering committee of the Community of Practice on Cash Transfers in Africa. So it's basically a network community of practice of people working in government on cash transfer programs. And I know that, Mautor, over to you, but I know that you've been able to, within that space, share this type of stories, and that it would be interesting to get your views on what has been just discussed.
Yeah, thank you very much. From the perspective of the community of practice of form this community, and we have two, the Anglophone and the Francophone, actually. But I chairing the Anglophone group, and our two main means of exchanging information and knowledge, experiences is one through the online, and then secondly through face-to-face. So we normally organize, we share information on the various components of cash transfer programs, how we target our beneficiaries, how we deliver the payment, what the case, issues that crop up, you know, grievance, redress mechanisms, etc., etc. That's what we've been doing for quite some time now. But I'll say this year, we were to have our face-to-face in Ethiopia, and we even went there for a planning meeting and prepared, and then all of a sudden, here we are in the world with the COVID-19, and we're not able to have this face-to-face meeting. So we have to find other ways of, you know, keeping the community alive. So the good side of the COVID is that we have to go back to work using the face-to-face or sorry, the online, you know, medium. The online medium was good from the beginning, but we're having some challenges, especially how to get members to actually really participate. But along the line, we've been struggling to see how best we can reorganize this. But with the coming of the COVID, we could not have that face-to-face. Many people are enthusiastic, especially on having the face-to-face. So we had a webinar last month, which was very good. Attendance was okay. People were enthusiastic about it. And now we are finding a way of organizing another one next month, you know, on topical issues that are of interest to members that all of us can benefit from. So in one way, the COVID-19 is also a blessing in the sense that our online meetings have not been working well for quite some time, but with the coming of COVID, we are getting back into it. So it's more or less, though it was a challenge, or it's a challenge to all of us in the world, it's also a blessing because we are going back to one of the major means of meeting members and sharing ideas. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much to be able to share that perspective. But also I think it's really interesting because Sigrid was just talking about, you know, having these sorts of informal networks where people are not maybe wearing their agency hats, etc. And it sounds like that community of practice is exactly that in a way for government, for public servants, which I think is a super interesting way to be able to look at it. Zaina, I saw your comment for knowledge management products, etc., and we will be getting to that. And Diana, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Yeah, if you can unmute yourself, give us a quick introduction, but then, yeah, go ahead and share.
Hi, I'm Diana King. I work for WFP in Malawi. I'm a big fan of this entire conversation because I feel like if we are able to share these experiences, we're able to maybe see ahead what the stumbling blocks might be and avoid repeating them in context. So I'm always happy to share all the failures that we've had. One of the big things that I would share with this community right now that we've experienced here is really trying to figure out what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve. What that means is that in a context where you've got a mature social protection system, it's perhaps a bit more easy to say what is the role of social protection in responding to certain shocks versus humanitarian. But in a context like Malawi, where you've actually got a developing social protection system, it becomes a bit more challenging to figure out what are you talking about extending an existing social protection program outwards as a result of the shock, or are you actually just doing an emergency program but trying to do it through a kind of social protection approach? And we faced this challenge when COVID hit. Malawi doesn't have any, well, currently doesn't have any social protection in the urban context, but as we all know, COVID-19 is going to affect the urban areas first and foremost. And so there was this quite lengthy discussion about whether we should be extending one of the main programs in the country to the urban context, whether it's appropriate in terms of the transfer values, in terms of the targeting, even in terms of the communication, noting that there was going to be no long-term funding for this kind of an intervention. What are the potential negative impacts if we call a kind of a very short-term urban intervention the same name as a rural intervention, one of which has funding for 5 years and one of which only has funding for, let's say, 4? Are there going to be challenges? You know, are we going to start to raise negative expectations? Things like that. And so what we came back to was, well, what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve here? And of course, the only reason why we were talking about urban cash transfer programming at all was because of this emergency context. And so as a result, by kind of taking away all of the previous understandings about what was there and what were the opportunities, and kind of starting from what are the needs and why are we actually having this conversation, we were able to change the discourse, let's say, and focus on designing something that made sense from the perspective of the beneficiaries, and that actually is now going to be delivered in a way that is going to build up a social protection system in the urban areas, but that meets the emergency needs of those beneficiaries in these areas. So kind of like combining the benefits of both and trying to avoid as many of the negative aspects. Obviously, this hasn't been fully implemented yet, so I'm sure there's going to be lots of other roadblocks and other learnings that we might be able to you know, document and share as well. But I think from our side, one of the big things that we wanted to share was when you're confused or worried about why you're even talking about social protection and humanitarian, kind of focusing back on what is bringing you to that conversation and what is the problem that you're trying to solve is something that actually Claire O'Brien, who's also on the call, frequently says to me as well. So it's stuck in my head, and we've definitely used it in Malawi. So just wanted to share that with all. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Philippe, I do see your hand. And, you know, there's a couple of things that I just want to sort of mesh together. But so much of what you're saying, Diane, is connected to what Anna was saying. You know, sit down and have that conversation as well and figure out what it is that you are trying to do. What are the outcomes and objectives? You know, what you did say about being able to document and share that journey. The documentation and sharing is something that we do not see very often. One of the things that, and I don't know how many of you know, the Grand Bargain subgroup on linking social protection and humanitarian cash transfers, myself and Isabel Pelli used to work for them, and we had done this whole entire piece on knowledge management and learning, and this was the one big key gap, you know, that we don't have enough, nobody has time or the money to be able to actually document and share in what kind of a manner. You know, people wanted short case studies, nobody sitting down and reading an evaluation report. And this is going into a conversation we'll come to a little bit later in terms of what do these products actually need to look like, where the lessons can actually be applied. I'm going to stop there and open it up to Philippe. Nanand, you have put in a comment, which I will come back to because that is literally the conversation that Cecile, myself, and Celine have had for 4 weeks. But Philippe, if you can introduce yourself and yeah, your input.
Hi, Philippe Late. I'm with the World Bank. I'm senior social protection economist there. I just want to piggyback on Cecile Chehier's point about the community of practice and Malto Arbor, and also some points that was mentioned by Anna and now the last one that you just mentioned about monitoring. The community of practice, like Malto mentioned, like it was a joint effort that was created by the World Bank and UNICEF, where the clients, they were the focus of it. Because most of the time when we have community of practice, like it's the donors talking about, is the donors trying to give the solution to the government. Instead of putting the government at the center and trying to let them talk and see how we can feed the information that is needed for them without bringing any ideology on it. It's just trying to bring the topics, bring the experts. So we had many meetings in the Francophone community of practice, Anglophone community of practice, where like for 5 days, you see the governments sharing their experience and some technicians participating as just to put the topic in and bring in the experts. Like 3-4 years ago, I do not remember, Cecilia was talking and Claire O'Brien talking about adaptive social protection in one of these topics. Okay, and today, adaptive social protection is something that the governments are picking. So it was not imposed on them. It was just like, this is what is there. So we as donors, in terms of donor community, we have to bring like the new frontiers. We have to bring the technology. We have to bring the intervention. But they are the ones that at the end of the day are deciding, because as Anna mentioned at the beginning, the government has one way to proceed. It's not us that can convince the Minister of Finance to put money on a program, despite the fact that we can convince my main counterpart that this program is important. If finance is not convinced, we do not have a program. So one thing is about how we can work with the government and trying to open up even their vision in terms of what is social protection. Social protection is not one program. One program is not going to solve the world. Social protection does not work alone without talking with education and health. So even among our community, we have to bring the other sectors in, because we can talk about here, like we have a program X that I would like to improve human capital. I need to make sure that there is a hospital, there is a clinic, there is a school that is operating and functional to have the children to be there. If there is no supply of service, these people will never accumulate human capital, despite the fact that we have the right person receiving the intervention, the cash transfer, or the food. You know, we need to work cross-sectoral. And this is what sometimes with donors, like, and I'm putting myself as part of the donor community with the World Bank. It's like many times we work in silos and we try to impose our ideas in the government without understanding their needs and without working with understanding their fails and our fail, because we, in a way, and I mentioned we as everybody here, like many times we go to the country and we say like, this is wrong, this is the right. Instead of saying like, this is wrong, there are some gaps, let's work together in the gaps. So you will learn about the mistakes and you are improving slowly, but you are improving and you are owner of your intervention. You appropriate your intervention and you can defend your intervention. And then that goes to the last point, is about the monitoring part. That was something that we tried to, in our conversations with the governments during the community of practice meetings, the Francophone mostly that I participated more, but in Anglophone also it was there. It was this last point that you mentioned, Zara, about the importance of process, the transparency, the importance of the information. This in the end is a trial and error. There is no right or wrong. It's a trial and error, and you have to find the errors to make the decision. So every year we need to correct something for the following year. So the error that we made in the first year needs to become an input for the next year. And that's the only way that we go. Otherwise, we will always block, because we will always fail, because we do not want to learn. We just want to reinvent the wheel. And that's the point about like what to do. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. Like Claire, I see your hand. I mean, there's a couple of things in there. You know, you were talking about all the things that we need to do. There's a lot of things that, yes, we do need to do. But, you know, are we actually doing them? You know, and this whole entire thing about, you know, the process and transparency, the trial and error. And the thing is, we will all talk about innovation. You know, when people are writing their proposals, everybody wants to talk about innovation, but nobody is actually giving the time. I would like to, if you are not on a phone, then please access the chat box, because Nanand has literally written what Failing Forward is meant to be about, because it is connected to innovation. It is a term from the private sector, but if we're going to talk about it in places of crisis, it's quite difficult actually to be able to do trial and error, because you know you have a time crunch, and trial and error can happen when you have a longer time frame. I'm not saying it's the only time it can happen, but I think there's something quite interesting there for us to be able to explore, which is where Cecile and I wanted to take the conversation. But given that we realized that we are not actually even applying lessons learned, we are not documenting, we are not sharing, we are actually too far behind even to get to proper innovation in a way, and to be able to fail forward, because as a sector, as individuals, I think we are learning. And I love that Nupur told the story as a journey, because I think it is an individual journey right now. And Tina, right after Claire and Julie, we're going to come to you, please, to talk to us a little bit about, you know, what can we be looking at in terms of being able to learn collectively, jointly, individually, organizationally. I'm not sure if organizationally can actually even happen. But Yeah, I'm going to then drop that over there. But just one point, Philippe, you talked about, how this community of practice was set up by, with the support of World Bank and UNICEF, and resourcing learning is one of the key things. And it's been a challenge for the online community in social protection and crisis, is that we don't have the resources around it to actually be able, it has to be resourced. So I think that has to be like topic number one when we get to how are we going to make this happen? We have to resource it. Otherwise, if you do not put money in it, you cannot do it. Claire, over to you.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. I was having problems yesterday. Yep, great. I would be interested to know the views of people on this community about the pilots versus not pilots discussion, because in the development world, I think the word pilot has been a dirty word for quite some years, because people feel like in in OECD, because of upper like higher income countries, people tend not to pilot things. We just talk about maybe rolling things out gradually, and you sort of do all your analysis behind the scenes, decide what you want to do, and then go for a policy choice. Whereas if you're not going to pilot something, one wonders where this trial and error is going to come from. And I think sometimes the international humanitarian people see that one of their roles could be to be the ones piloting for their own programs and testing things out, and then saying to the government, hey, look, we've also been supporting people and we use this technology or this method, and are you interested? So somehow it would be good to know whether it's possible to do pilots within the development space still, or whether people are still averse to it, or whether maybe we do what Philippe was talking about, and it's more a question of framing it as being like the rollout of a program that happens to have continuous adjustments. Or otherwise, like, how is this going to work? And the only example I can think of recently and related to COVID is with this app, all of the contact tracing apps. I know the one in the UK, they did it as a pilot for a few weeks, and then they ended up scrapping it because it didn't work properly. And it was done, with public funds, and everyone was like, oh, you just spent millions on an app that didn't work. And they were like, yes, excellent, successful piloting of something. We've concluded that it's not the right thing and put it away. And I don't know that necessarily washed with many people, for the reasons that we talked about the beginning, about the need to be careful about spending public funds. So it'd just be good to know from other people, like, where they see this discussion going, particularly in people who are in countries, whether if there's some sense that pilots can be useful, or whether we should really be concentrating on something that's called something else, or that is something else.
And maybe it's an issue around timing as well, or the thing that is being piloted, and appetite around that, the political environment around it, etc. But and it could just be an issue of semantics. A lot of times it's the same exact thing, it's just how we word it depending on where we are. Thank you so much for that, Claire. And I've asked people to put it inside the chat box as well, to be able to talk about pilot versus non-pilot, or rolling something out gradually, because I think it is one of the methods that we do use around trying something new and doing it differently, just so that we don't get attacked because it didn't work out, we didn't have a well thought out plan. Julie, over to you, please.
Hi. So, Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Sorry, I forgot my earphones are a bit dodgy. So I'm struggling slightly with this whole conversation, the idea around failure, and I tried to think of some examples I've come across, mostly from a more social protection context, of things that didn't work out initially and that were adjusted to. And I can think of payment cards for the HSNP in Kenya, which initially were coded in Spanish and you couldn't adjust the amount at all. So that was a clear failure to think ahead. I can think of when there was an attempt to introduce, under a development program, under a social protection program, child grants in Zambia. Now, it was a great idea, and it focused on the 5 districts with the absolute worst outcomes for children. And this particular experiment was impact evaluated into the ground, and all the results were great. but it sat really badly with government and national conceptions of who were the deserving poor, and giving money to fit young adults with children just did not fit well with how, at that point, many Zambians with influence felt money, scarce resources should be invested. But from the development perspective, and from the point of view of outcomes for children, it was, and for household productivity, it was a really good experiment, but it didn't work out. And, you know, that was probably a big shame. Similarly in Zambia, I remember a project where the Ministry of Social Protection and the Ministry of Education was supposed to work together, and the great idea was to give scholarships to girls in very poor households that were receiving social cash transfers. Sounds fantastic, you know, very poor girls, give them an education, keep them in secondary school, all sorts of great consequences. But the Ministry of Education was very used to focusing scholarships on students who did well, who were already succeeding, who would go on to sort of invest in the country. So I can think of all these examples of difficulties and failures. And I do think that one of the key ways in which really quite genuine national ownership is built is through piloting. And people say, oh, in pilots you can get everything right. But it is a good way, I think, of testing ideas out, of building evidence, and of then convincing the people who at the end of the day really have to buy into these projects to come along and to understand what's happening and to look at robust evidence. And I also had a little bit of a light bulb moment, like Nupur, because I've also switched in and out of humanitarian development. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, that's right, humanitarians really don't have to worry too much about what governments think in a lot of contexts. Yes, in MENA, where you've got these big hosted communities, but in a lot of other places, they're whooshing in. And they don't have to take on this really long-term negotiation of trying to, you know, we come with these fantastic, wonderful development ideas to governments that actually have had people doing that to them for the last 50 years and are trying to sort of find their own path. So anyway, I'll shut up then, but I sort of wanted to say those things.
Thank you, Julie. No, it's good to be able to hear like actual like different examples, like tangible examples around this stuff. And it's, you just light bulb momented me because, you know, I'm somebody who's coming from the humanitarian background and last 3 years moving more into the social protection side of things. And I didn't know that my humanitarian colleagues would walk into a country and think that they weren't responsible to the government. And if you are doing that as humanitarians, please stop. You are guests to a country. You should never be doing that. That's an awful, awful way to, I personally feel like it's an awful way to think. So Mutale, I see you, and if your intervention is a whole minute or minute and a half, that would be amazing. I don't want to cut people off, but I do want to absolutely be giving Tina a chance to come in. So go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks.
Everyone.
So
hi.
It's a very quick intervention because I'm from Zambia, and it's sort of a response to the previous speaker's intervention also. And I just wanted to add that, you know, the issue with the child grant as it was piloted is really more nuanced than really the way that the society responded to it. I think it's more the political issue then, and the fact that, and it ties into the conversation around the pilots that's just being had now, because at the time social cash transfers were being piloted as a response to poverty reduction. And so the child grants were introduced on the back of social cash transfers, which the society understood as an intervention to reduce poverty. Now the child grant in its design was specifically meant to reduce child poverty, regardless of the kind of household that the child was coming from. But what ended up happening is that it was implemented in some of the poorest regions, and therefore it was misunderstood because social cash transfers were understood to be a poverty-targeted intervention. So when you bring a program of this nature and introduce it under the guise of the social cash transfer, which you're piloting to see if it will work, and then not target the people that are considered to be ultra poor and deserving, then the society counter-reacts to the program and sees it as reaching the wrong people rather than reaching the right people. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Because again, having like actual stories around this is one of those first steps towards what Sigrid and quite a couple of other people have said about having, you know, a kind of, so this is kind of a community of practice right now. So we have made this space to be able to have this kind of a conversation, to people are having light bulb moments, which is great because that's what you want a community of practice to be able to do. And I'm going to ask Tina to come in because I think we've heard quite a few different things and people have spoken at different levels actually, in terms of as individuals, what they might have learned. You know, I've heard zero around an organization actually learning. That's the one I'm most interested in and the least hopeful about, but also maybe just as a community of practice. So Tina, over to you. If you can introduce yourself. We've kept you as like this mystery person, built, no pressure, no pressure.
No mystery here. So my name is, hello everyone, my name is Tiina Pasanen and I work as a research fellow at ODI, Overseas Development Institute in London. So I'm not the social protection expert like you all are. I work in monitoring, evaluation and learning. So I do research and that, but I also work as a learning partner in organizations and programs, trying to help them think through issues, use their evidence better and learn how to improve their programming while the programs are running. So not just afterwards, just while it's running. So I'm gonna share a few things that have worked in other programs. I actually have a few slides I'm gonna share with you in case the connection is not so good. So at least you can see that, hope it works. Let me know if it doesn't. All right. Hope you can see it. Okay, so just to say a few words about learning for adaptation, adaptive management and innovation. So I think that importance of learning has really increasingly recognized in international development in past 5+ years. Not to say that this wasn't important before, but it is more discussed, it's more debated, it's more, especially in programs using adaptive management approach, they are really putting more emphasis on it. But like many of you have said here, it's more difficult in practice, especially how do you institutionalize learning, how it will feed into decision-making and lead to actually concrete changes. So many programs and organizations, they really struggle finding time for learning, but also for capturing and sharing this learning with others. And as we discussed, learning from failure is especially difficult and it's not incentivized by senior management within organizations and donors. We all know things don't work always as expected in our programs or in life generally, but it seems to be really, really difficult to share these and there are all these reasons why not. But while we are so much better sharing our success cases and what we learn from them. But I really think it does hinder innovation and it hinders adaptation. So some recommendations or things that have worked in other programs or organizations. So individual level, just making learning a part of everyone's job description and responsibility. While there can be these people who facilitate or champion or coordinate this learning, it is important everyone feels it's part of their job description. I think peer-to-peer learning, having mentors, finding others that are passionate about learning and doing things differently is super important, as well as having this curiosity mindset and trying to find others that have that or like cultivate that in others. I mainly work with program, portfolio and organizational level and how do you try to encourage learning there. As a starting point, I would say do not assume a collaborative mindset at the outset of the program. While this sounds quite bad in a way, but it often is the case that if you do a new proposal or a new program, in the proposal phase, everyone is really, yes, this is important, we're gonna share what doesn't work and all this. But when the program actually starts, it might be much more difficult and it is easily forgotten. Investing in facilitated face-to-face engagement sounds really weird in times of COVID-19. And of course, webinars are great and they are nowadays more interactive and they can be really helpful. But especially if you're working with new partners and you want to share what doesn't work, it needs some level of trust, and trust comes best from face-to-face engagement. Engaging early and intensively in setting up learning processes can really help, as well as setting learning priorities and realistic outcomes. So what are we learning about or learning for? It can be incredibly frustrating for people if they have learned about, for example, how do you improve this way of working or this part of your program, and you come up with ideas and there's evidence, and then you cannot do anything based on that learning. There needs to be mandate to act upon. I put a question mark in the end of the learning indicators because I keep changing my mind whether this is good. I don't
have 1 minute left. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say that sometimes what gets measured gets done. Creating incentives for learning. It can vary between people. Senior management buy-in and organizational culture. The importance cannot be undermined. And then trying to, like, programs need to be adapted, so does the learning mechanisms. And I will end by saying something about the global and community of practice level learning. So promoting collective ownership of learning agenda, revisiting the themes at a general basis, having group of champions, not just one person leading this, there needs to be a group of them, and really understanding the incentives for participation. There's so many platforms already. It really needs to somehow help people to do their work better, so it's meaningful and they have time for it. That's me. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so very, very much, Tina. And I think it sort of comes up with quite a few of the things that we were talking about already, and in terms of, you know, how do we put people, I mean, in terms of individuals, etc. Diana has put a really, really great question in there, like who owns the, who owns the failures? You know, an issue that you can see is that it's easy to praise another actor, much harder to highlight their failures, even if it's framed positively. Are we only allowed to talk about our own failures? And I love the last slide where you had that thing about, you know, we need champions. We need people to be able to create the space. So, you know, we invite everybody. We can totally extend our session by 5 minutes because we only have 2 minutes left, but I know that people have like actual lives and things to do. But it would be great if we could be putting things inside the chat box, or if people also just want to raise their hand and to be able to sort of comment on, you know, where do you think the next steps are actually going to be? What do we need to be able to do? So we've had this call, but, you know, we've had this, but, you know, what else can we be doing? I think there is a consensus. There's like, you know, 63 of you who showed up to this panel to talk about failures and wanting to learn from failures. So where does this leave us now? It's not like Cecilia and I have the answers. We just hosted the space to be able to talk about it. But hands or unmuted mics is what I'm looking for. I'm very happy to stay 5 minutes further. So if anybody, it's literally, I don't have any unmuted mics, really? Somebody's got something to say. Anna.
I think keeping it anonymous is the way forward. Honestly, I think we all have so much information and knowledge, but unless you're an independent consultant that never wants to work in this space again, it's very difficult to be honest about the challenges. It doesn't matter if you're in private sector. I mean, in private sector, it's really attractive to say that you are a multiple failure innovator. That makes you a great startup innovator. But does that make you a systems builder? Does that make you the owner of a multi-million-dollar company? No, that's different stages, you know, different platforms. We can't just say innovation for innovation's sake. We have to recognize the space that we're in. We have to recognize the accountability for public finances. But if we want to be honest and open, if we want government to share their honest perspectives, we have to find ways to maybe do so anonymously to start and then move from there, or recognize and open up these spaces. I put in the chat, I find that the absolute best conversations you can have if you get a Minister of Social Development talking to another Minister of Social Development, nobody else in the room, two people, they can talk reality because they understand it better than anyone from any UN agency could ever understand. So let's just, if we really believe in it, let's recognize the limitations and let's find, ways to really have these open spaces. And I think the community of practice is a great opportunity for that, and actually having policymakers in a room with each other where they can, meet over a beer and have these conversations. That's where the magic happens.
And this is why Cecile and I co-host the informal hangout, where we have, in fact, somebody has just joined the informal hangout, but it's the wrong time because it's 3 hours. We're happy to share the link in there. I see you, Richard. We're happy to share the link in the box, etc. And it's open invite. Anybody can show up. We talk about social protection and humanitarian. It is no agency hats. It is something that we do as individuals. Richard, it's yes, unmuted. Yes, tell us.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I would want to say a bit about failures in learning. Actually, there's not like failure. One learns. Only when you're not able to observe your triumph or your success. That is where you see your failure. So as a learner, you always need to persevere. Where you see yourself failing, that is where you need to wipe off any discouragement and then work harder. At the end of it all, you realize you not be extra excellent, but you pass out, and then success becomes yours. But if you put in your mind that there is failure, you truly you see your success as failure, actually. So this is the letter that I have. I'm Richard from Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Sure. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to make a little point. The subject of failing forward, this concept itself, for me, is innovative. Innovative in the sense that most of the time, when we come up with an initiative and we fail and we continue and we're able to succeed, then we begin to share our experience on what we have achieved. But how we were able to overcome those challenges, or the challenges that we have identified, and how we overcome those challenges, we normally don't talk about them. You see, so people will just see, oh, we have this initiative, this is how we have done it, and we have achieved it. If we share the failures and how those failures have inspired us to move ahead and to solve them, then it gives an inspiration to others who come up with some similar initiatives that, look, people have done this, they have failed, and they have managed to succeed at the end of the day. So we can also continue along that line and make it. So we need to be talking about our failures and how we have achieved or we have overcome those failures, so that we begin to inspire each other. If we continue talking about just the successes, I believe it will not give that opportunity for people to begin to learn and to improve upon themselves. So I just want to suggest that we should intensify and continue this discussion on failing forward. What does it mean? We need to broaden and sell this concept for people to understand. And I believe that it's going to inspire all of us to move to greater heights. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's incredibly important to be able to say. And, it goes back to the point that Anna was also mentioning that, nobody, if you want to work in this space, you're not going to step forward and say, unless I guess you're an independent consultant, etc. But how do we enable that space to happen where people are not afraid to step forward and say it? And be like, all right, so we failed, but hey, we learned and we're going to apply it next time. Christy, I'm going to ask you to come in because I know that you did have a point to make, and then I promise I will start wrapping this up.
Yeah, my point was fairly similar, but I think that it is very beneficial just to have the practice of hearing the word failures coming from other people's mouths and then using it ourselves. And I think it's a lot easier to discuss failures when the solution has ultimately been found. But we tend, in that case, as we've discussed, it tends to be framed as like, oh, lessons we learned along the way, but maybe just the linguistic change to say, initially we thought this, we started developing this, that failed, so we moved to this, and you just get more comfortable with that term. And then, so I agree with Anna, we're probably not going to get to the point where people are publicly sharing and calling kind of mid to large failures, but I think trying really hard to actually call small failures in that language might help us in terms of this whole concept.
But I sort of agree with that. I think there's a responsibility that more senior level people have. If you have built up enough street cred, as we would say, in your career, because I'm not saying I'm like super expert or anything like that. I have been doing this for 15 years, at least, I have built up some street cred. I feel like I therefore have a responsibility, a personal responsibility to be able to step up and say, here is where we failed, or here is where I failed. Because it's not like it's going to ruin my career. Well, I would hope not, but if it does, that's, but I do feel like, senior level people do need to be able to talk about it more. We should not put that on our junior. If we have that privilege, we should be able to use it. If we have some street credibility with donors, with our peers, with other people, we should be stepping up and we should be building that space. This is what women leaders have done for people like me. All the women that came before me built the space for me to be sitting here and doing this. So, we should be building that space for others to be able to feel a lot more comfortable. It's about normalizing the language. Cecile, I am going to hand over to you to talk about the survey, because I know we have been putting those links in the box, and any sort of parting words from you.
Okay, so I'm going to put it again in the chat box. That works. No. So what we've done is basically we all agree that it's easier to share failure confidentially. So that's why as an attempt, we created this online survey. So you have the link in the chat. It can be filled in English or French. So that would be one way to collect stories that you think would be insightful for peers. As we mentioned, another way is the informal hangout we offer on a weekly basis with Zara. So again, safe space, no recording this time. And I mean, any ideas most welcome, really. We've been thinking of organizing maybe one day a FELFest. So if you have any interest in this, you're welcome to contact us. So if you click on the link collection of personal stories, you will also have the link to contact us directly. And yeah, let's continue the conversation. I mean, I think it's a journey, it's a conversation. So yes, we don't want to focus on failure for the sake of focusing on failure, but it's really about this iterative process to make sure that we develop systems that are adapted to the environment. Could you also add Spanish? Sure, if there's a volunteer to translate the survey in Spanish. That's how it works in the online community. If you have an idea, just join us. So Anna, if that was you volunteering for the Spanish version, you're most welcome.
Or Zena as well, volunteering for it. Thank you, everybody. We know we've gone terribly, horribly over time, but I think this was, Cecile, I would say this went as well as we could have expected it to go. Would you agree? But it is, I mean, a lot of things over here. Donors, the chat function is still ongoing. And yeah, donors need to also be able to step up and create that space. I think the public needs to be able to step up and create that space for their own governments as well, because that is who governments are accountable to. But thank you so much, everybody. We hope this is not the last that we will be having this conversation. And yeah, we will see you on the online community on social protection and crisis context and all the other different sorts of spaces. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I guess that's it. Everybody's excused.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.